The night was cold on Nova Roma when Marcus Severus walked through the empty streets toward the eastern gate. His boots made soft sounds against the ancient stone pathways that humans had built 300 years ago on this distant world. The colony had grown into a mighty fortress city, surrounded by walls of reinforced steel and energy shields that could stop any weapon. But tonight, Marcus carried something more dangerous than any weapon. He carried betrayal in his heart. The Vicari had promised him wealth beyond imagination. They had promised him a seat among their ruling council. They had promised him revenge against the consul, who had executed his father for speaking against the government. Marcus did not care that the Vicari had conquered 17 human colonies in the past decade. He did not care that they had killed millions of his own kind. His hatred for Consul Tiberius was stronger than his love for humanity. He reached the control room of the Eastern Gate. 2 guards stood at their posts, young soldiers barely 20 years old. Marcus knew them both. He had trained them himself as their senior officer. They saluted him with respect and trust in their eyes. Marcus killed them both before they could understand what was happening. His hands shook as he entered the override codes into the gate system. The massive doors began to open, their ancient mechanisms groaning in protest. Beyond the walls, hidden in the darkness of the alien forest, 100,000 Vicari warriors waited with their weapons ready. Their commander, a tall creature with gray skin and 4 arms, watched the gates open with satisfaction. The humans had built an impressive fortress, but every fortress could fall to treachery. The Vicari army moved forward like a dark river flowing through the open gates. Their footsteps were silent, their discipline perfect. They spread through the streets of Nova Roma, surrounding the sleeping homes of 50,000 human colonists. The invasion had taken less than an hour. By the time the first alarm sounded, it was already too late. Consul Tiberius woke to the sound of energy weapons firing in the distance. He was an old man, 60 years of age, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of hard decisions. He had led Nova Roma through 3 wars and countless hardships. He had ordered the execution of many enemies, including the father of Marcus Severus, who had been plotting to sell colony secrets to the Vicari. Now it seemed that punishment had returned to destroy everything he had built. His personal guard rushed into his chambers with fear in their eyes. They told him the eastern gate was open. They told him the enemy was inside the walls. They told him there was no escape. Tiberius dressed himself in his ceremonial armor, the same armor his grandfather had worn when humans first landed on this world. He picked up his plasma rifle and walked out to face whatever fate awaited him. The streets of Nova Roma were chaos. Families ran screaming from their homes as Vicari soldiers kicked down doors and dragged people into the streets. Children cried for their parents. Old people fell and could not get up. The invasion was brutal and efficient, designed to break the spirit of resistance before it could form. But something strange began to happen in the market district. A baker named Julius, a simple man who had never held a weapon in his life, picked up a metal rod and struck a Vicari soldier who was threatening his daughter. The alien fell, surprised by the sudden attack. Before it could recover, 3 more humans joined the fight with whatever they could find: chairs, stones, broken bottles. The Vicari squad was overwhelmed by the sudden violence of ordinary people who had decided they would rather die fighting than live as slaves. This scene repeated itself across the city. In the residential blocks, a retired teacher organized her neighbors into a defensive group that held back 2 Vicari platoons for almost an hour. In the industrial sector, factory workers used their heavy machinery to crush enemy soldiers who tried to enter their workspace. In the medical center, doctors and nurses defended their patients with surgical tools and chemical agents that burned through alien armor. The Vicari commander watched these developments with growing concern. His army had conquered many human colonies before. The pattern was always the same. Humans would panic, scatter, and surrender once they saw the size of his forces. They were supposed to be weak creatures who valued their individual lives above all else. That was what his intelligence reports had said. That was what Marcus Severus had promised him. But these humans were not surrendering. They were fighting with a fury that made no logical sense. They were dying in large numbers, yes, but they were taking Vicari soldiers with them. Every street became a battlefield. Every building became a fortress. Every human, from the youngest adult to the oldest elder, seemed ready to die rather than accept defeat. Consul Tiberius led a group of soldiers and civilians toward the central plaza, where the original colony ship still stood as a monument to human determination. He knew the city was lost. He knew most of his people would die before sunrise. But he also knew something that the Vicari did not understand. Humans were not like other species. When humans were pushed to the edge, they did not break. They became something terrifying. They became creatures of pure will and desperate courage. They became warriors who fought not for victory, but for meaning, for the chance to make their deaths count for something greater than themselves. Marcus Severus watched the battle from a rooftop near the eastern gate. He had expected to feel satisfaction as the Vicari swept through the city. Instead, he felt a growing horror as he saw his own people fighting with such incredible bravery. A young woman he recognized from the market was leading a charge against an enemy position with nothing but a kitchen knife. An old man he had known his entire life was using his own body to shield a group of children from enemy fire. These were the people he had betrayed. These were the people he had condemned to death. The Vicari commander ordered his elite forces to push toward the central plaza. The human resistance was stronger than expected, but his army still had overwhelming numbers. Victory was certain. It was only a matter of time. But time was something the humans had learned to use better than any other species in the galaxy. Deep beneath Nova Roma, in tunnels that did not appear on any map, a signal was received by a small group of engineers who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The colony's founders had known that their world might one day face invasion. They had prepared for that possibility in secret, never telling anyone outside their small circle. The knowledge had been passed down through generations, waiting for the day it would be needed. The engineers activated the ancient systems with steady hands and determined hearts. Across the city, hidden weapons emerged from beneath the streets. Energy cannons rose from the ground, like flowers blooming in fast motion. Automated defense turrets descended from buildings that had always looked like ordinary structures. The entire city transformed into a killing ground designed by paranoid ancestors who had survived too many wars to ever feel truly safe. The Vicari army was caught completely off guard. Their formations were torn apart by concentrated fire from directions they had not expected. Their command structure collapsed as communication systems were jammed by powerful interference. Their retreat routes were blocked by walls of plasma fire that appeared from nowhere. Consul Tiberius stood in the central plaza and watched the tide of battle turn with tears running down his weathered face. His people were still dying, yes. But now they were dying with hope instead of despair. Now they were dying with victory within reach. The battle lasted until sunrise. By the time the first light touched the blood-stained streets of Nova Roma, the Vicari army had been reduced to scattered groups of survivors desperately trying to escape through the same gate they had entered so confidently just hours before. Marcus Severus was found hiding in a storage building near the eastern wall. He did not resist when the soldiers came for him. He did not speak when they brought him before Consul Tiberius. He simply stood there with empty eyes, a man who had learned too late what it meant to be human. The consul looked at the traitor for a long moment. He remembered the execution of Marcus's father. He remembered the difficult choice he had made to protect his people from those who would sell them to their enemies. He saw in Marcus the same weakness that had corrupted his father, the inability to understand that some things were more valuable than personal gain. Tiberius ordered Marcus to be imprisoned, not executed. Death would be too easy. Marcus would spend the rest of his life watching the city he had tried to destroy grow stronger and more united than ever before. Word of the Battle of Nova Roma spread across human space within days. The story was told and retold in colonies and stations throughout the galaxy. How a traitor had opened the gates. How an army had flooded through the streets. How ordinary people had fought back with nothing but their courage and their refusal to surrender. How ancient preparations had turned certain defeat into unlikely victory. The Vakari Empire received a clear message from this battle. Humans were not easy prey. Humans were not creatures who could be broken by fear or overwhelming force. Humans were something different, something dangerous, something that would fight to the last breath for the simple right to exist on their own terms. Other alien species heard the story too. They learned that human colonies were not targets to be raided. They learned that human cities were not prizes to be won through treachery. They learned that when you attacked humans, you were not attacking individuals. You were attacking a species that had crawled out of one small planet and spread across the stars through pure stubbornness and absolute refusal to accept defeat. Nova Roma rebuilt itself in the years that followed. New walls rose higher than before. New defenses were added to the already impressive systems. New generations were born and raised with the story of that terrible night when a traitor opened the gates and an entire city rose to meet the enemy. The colony became a symbol of human resilience throughout the galaxy. Diplomats from dozens of species came to visit and understand what made humans so difficult to conquer. They walked the same streets where desperate battles had been fought. They stood in the same plaza where Consul Tiberius had watched his people transform from victims into warriors. They saw the monument that was eventually built to honor both the dead and the living who had defended their home against impossible odds. The lesson of Nova Roma was simple but powerful. Humans could be hurt. Humans could be betrayed. Humans could be pushed to the very edge of destruction. But humans could never truly be defeated, because defeat was not something they believed in. Victory was not something that could be taken from them by force. It was something they carried inside themselves, passed down through countless generations of survivors who had faced extinction and chosen to keep fighting anyway. That was the truth the Vakari discovered when they flooded through those open gates. That was the truth written in the blood and fire of that long night. That was the truth that echoed across the galaxy and made every enemy of humanity think twice before starting a war they could not possibly win.